So for our cornered seam, you'll have these two pieces. The seam we're sewing is this seam here in the middle. So this is obviously the corner that we're going around. The first thing to remember when you're doing a cornered seam is that one of them has to be snipped right to the needle for it to be able to pivot around that corner. So it's important to know which piece of fabric that you have on top and which piece you have underneath. The general rule, which is always the same, never changes, is that if you look at the seam that we're doing here, you'll notice that this we can say is a 90-degree edge. This here is 270 degrees. The rule is that the more amount of degrees you have, the larger the piece, then that's the one that needs to be on top, because that's the one that you're going to need to snip in order to get round the corner. So looking at it like this, it means that to sew this seam, this one needs to be on top. So I need it to be like that. I'm going to have to approach it from this direction. The second most important thing then to remember, now you know that this is the piece that needs to be on top because this is the piece we're cutting, is the exact point at which we're pivoting around. So what I always do is grab a pin, and what I try and do is imagine the intersection of the two seams and where they join. So the seam here is 3/8. So what I do is put my pin parallel to this seam here, and then thinking about the tip of my pin here, I'm imagining where exactly this point is going to meet this point. So it will actually be at 45 degrees from here. So to get the right positioning, it's going to be there. And I put my pin right into that point there. I let it go through the fabric, so I've got that now secure. And now we have to do the same for the underneath piece. Again, imagine the stitch going around the corner and the exact point at which we're going to turn. So again, looking down from 3/8 and where it's going to meet, it's going to be here. And I'm going to push my pin through both layers. Okay, so this point where the pin is going in is the exact point at which I'm aiming to. That's the point which we're going to stop and then snip to our needle to allow it to go around. So if I take it to the machine, and we can sew the first half of the seam. So remember, we're aiming for that exact point. So I'm going to put my needle in and leave it there. Now obviously I have to take the pin out. What you've got to be really careful of now is that take your foot off the pedal, because if you have any involuntary motion in your foot that makes the needle go further, then you've ruined that point, you've gone too far. So that point is, we don't want to go any further than that. What I'm going to do is lift up the foot, and what we have to do now is come right into the needle with our scissors. We are going to cut right up to where the needle is in the fabric. And we're going to cut, you literally want the scissors to hit the needle. Yeah, so you know you've cut right up to the side of the needle. Don't cut in front of the needle. If you cut in front of the needle, it means you'll have a hole at that corner. So again, let's just triple check that we've snipped. If you don't snip all the way, you'll get a little tuck in it. Now that we know that we've cut all the way to the needle, you see the rest of the seam now is here. So we turn it round in this direction. And because we've cut the seam allowance to the needle, it means it allows us to pivot this now around that point where the needle is still holding. And you can just give it a little press. What you're going to be careful of is that you don't pull too much. If you pull, because you've clipped right to the needle, if you're not careful, you can again make a little hole by pulling some of the threads away. So I've turned it around, so my second half of the seam now is lining up exactly. I can put the foot down and we just carry on. So now we've gone around our corner, we just need to give it a press. So we go to the iron. So, as you always would, first you press flat, making sure you don't really want to press on this corner, just on the seams. And then, rather than pressing our seams open, you'll notice that if we tried to press these seams open here, we'd get a lot of bulk here in this corner. So when you do a cornered seam like this, you press it, you see the seam wants to just sit out and flat, so you press it down like that. So there we have our cornered seam.